Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining. I'm Judy Hecker, Director of IPCNY, and we've got a lively hour in store for you. We're delighted to co-host this event with Manhattan Graphic Center and our special guests, Bud Shark in Colorado and Enrique, California. Enrique's work is currently part of IPCNY's online exhibition, Reprint 5 Projects. A quick overview about tonight. Enrique and Bud will both make individual presentations followed by a moderated discussion. The audience will remain on mute, and while our chat function is off for you, we encourage you to use the question and answer function found Q&A on the far right of your Zoom bar at the bottom of your screen. Send us questions throughout, and we'll address as many as we can at the end. Lastly, following the program, we'll send a very short survey. We'd love to hear your feedback and the kinds of events you'd like to see from us in the future. Now on to our 4 participants. Sarah Kirk Hanley, Director of Manhattan Graphics Center, the nonprofit community printmaking studio, has published articles on Chagoya's prints and organized Chagoya's 2014 print survey at the gallery at Wayne State University in Detroit. She has served as curator, critic, and specialist in the field of prints for over 20 years. Master printer and publisher Bud Shark has devoted his career to collaborating with over 150 artists since the founding of Sharks with his wife, the artist Barbara Shark, in 1976. From Red Grooms to Betty Woodman to Yvonne Jacquette and Hung Lu, artists pilgrimage to Colorado because Bud supports their strong personal vision and outside of the box making. Bud discovered the magic of lithography at the University of Wisconsin and received his MA from the University of Mexico. His editions are in museum collections from MoMA, the Met, and the Whitney to the Art Institute of Chicago and the Philadelphia Museum of Art. The book, The Legend of Bud Shark and His Indelible Ink, was published for his 2009 survey at the MCA Denver, and his archive of over 3,000 works and related materials can be found now at the CU Art Museum at the University of Colorado Boulder, where they're developing an exhibition currently. We're so grateful that Bud's with us here tonight. Enrique Chagoya was born and raised in Mexico City, where his father encouraged his interest in art at a very young age. His early life of political awareness and action in Mexico would later surface in his mature art. At 26, Chagoya moved to Berkeley, later attending the San Francisco Art Institute and the University of California, Berkeley. He settled in San Francisco in 1995 and has been exhibiting work nationally and internationally at renowned museums ever since. He's a full professor at Stanford University's Department of Art and Art History. He's a brilliant artist, writer, and lecturer, and I'm so pleased to hand over the Zoom mic to Enrique Chagoya now. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Judy, and thank you, Sarah and Bud, for being together here. It's my privilege to be part of this and to be part of the exhibition at the International Print Center in New York with some of my favorite artists. Anyway, so I guess I'm gonna start with my talk because we have limited time. I have quite a few images that I want to share, and it's better to talk with images than without. So let me start here. I have my slideshow ready, and all right. So everybody can see it well. Can you hear me? All right. Very good. So I'm going to start with all kinds of prints, with especially with appropriations. For a long time, I have had a fascination with printmaking, and particularly with reproducing, look-alike prints. Basically influenced by my childhood when I was exposed to my father's office. My father used to work for the Central Bank in Mexico City, and his office was a museum of crime. He had a lot of plates with money plates that were next to the forgeries. And I was about 10 years old when I was struck by the similitude between the forgery and the actual money. There was denominations from many countries, not only Mexican fake money, but also American, US dollars, francs, Moroccan money, Cuban pesos, bolivars from Venezuela, and so on. So that left a big impression in me. So when I went to study printmaking at the San Francisco Art Institute, for the first time I was exposed to original prints by Goya in my history of printmaking class. The history of printmaking class was at the Legion of Honor Museum at the Achenbach collection, and my teacher was the curator there, Robert Flynn Johnson, and he was showing us prints from different times and places in the world, and we saw them without any framing, without any glass, and I fell in love with Goya's etchings, particularly from the disasters of war. So for our final project in the class, I was still a student at the Art Institute in my senior year. I decided to make for my final project in the art history of printmaking, my first attempt to forgery. So that's when I did, my first attempt against the common good. That's the title of the print. And basically, this was something that is about the same size as the original print. I went with my measuring tape to see the original. I took notes in terms of how long should I leave it in the acid, etc. And then I drew by hand as much as I could and as close as possible the image towards Goya's print. I noticed that my line were too straight, and in order to really make the lines close to the Goya print, I had to shake my hand a little bit. So the lines became more close to Goya's lines. I realized then that probably by the time Goya made these prints, he might have had a shaky hand. So there was kind of like a conversation with the ghost of Goya. Anyway, so I did this print in 1983. And 20 years later, Segura Publishing in Arizona at the time, printed my whole series of, after the disasters of war, my homage to Goya in 2003. So I did different prints that way. And let me see if I could move to the next slide here. All right, so I began to do research on different different sources, like in this case, Walt Disney design of gas mask for children, which today, could be very useful, especially for places like Disney World, that they should use this probably before they close the parks, but they might need them in the near future. So anyway, I decided to mix this with other prints by Goya. By the way, these prints, I got them from the Dover edition of the Disasters of War, which are fairly close to the original prints. And so here I decided to mix the Mickey Mouse gas mask, and also the idea that when you get into Disney World, it says, "Welcome to the happiest place on earth." Mix it with the unhappiest place on earth, which is war. So I end up doing my own version of that. It's sort of like my yin and yang. All of these etchings were done pretty much like trying to follow as much as possible the original. They are not photo etchings. They are, I basically outline the image from a photocopy from the Dover book, and then the rest of the lines and the Mickey Mouse, I just did a hand draw directly on the plate. That's pretty much how I've done most of my prints after Goya. I have done other series, including the Proverbios. So here, there's another series of by Goya that are some of my favorite prints from the Caprichos. And, Goya made this basically to critique superstition in Spain. And I did a series of these prints. the second series of prints I did. The first one I did was, again, as I say, with Segura Publishing, with Joe Segura in Arizona. These ones I made them at ULIE with Bill Goldston. A few years later. This was from 2012 to 2015. I did a couple of series over there. Anyway, so I decided that, you know, the Goya's hat was too big for me. I don't pretend to compete with the master, but still, I wanted to keep playing the idea of trying to make a forgery, you know, like what I got inspired by when I was a kid in my father's office, without being a forgery, of course, and getting away with it. So I did several prints too from this series, and one of my favorite prints from anywhere in all times is The Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters. In this case, Goya has sort of like a self-portrait surrounded by symbols of evil in the time. But for me, you know, the owl and even the bats and the cats are not symbols of evil. For me, in spite of the recent bad rap, I think it's very beneficial for agriculture. A lot of bats are endangered species in the US. They are dying from you know, fungus infections. And the owl is an endangered species too. And cats, I have cats and I love cats. So I decided to change that for actually scary things, you know, like military equipment. So I have done a few different versions of this. This was done with Joe Segura as well in Arizona back in 1999. And this one was done at in ULIE. And I added my cat Lulu on the bottom with a little bit of bat wings. So I left a couple of owls here as pet companions of Goya. And this is more like an image of an apocalyptic scene that itself is in everybody's minds. And I decided to add a Mayan skull on the bottom. But I'm gonna talk a little bit about this Mayan mythology in an upcoming three-dimensional multiple that I did later. Anyway, so I'm very happy we did all these series. This is racial stereotypes, getting rid of the racist characters here. These are like KKK chicken, featherless, getting kicked out of the door. By a stereotype of a Mexican and African American. And I have done other prints in this case. This is a print that we did from ULIE as a benefit for the International Print Center in New York. And I believe this is still available. And this one, in this case, we see President Obama surrounded by all these evil characters. It could be people from Goldman Sachs or Tea Party, you name it. Could be anything. There was a big backlash I felt during Obama's times, particularly with white supremacist groups. So I decided to put a little KKK chicken right on the bottom. This is a letterpress stamp on top of the etching plate. This was done in 2010. So I have done other images, like in this case, I was invited by the Rosenbach Library and Museum in Philadelphia to participate during the 2010 Philagraphica to make a project with them. So I went to research their print collection, and I fell in love with a lot of prints by George Cruikshank, British satirist from the 1700s. And this was my favorite prints from those, and I decided to make my own version. So I did it, another look-alike. This was done with a collaboration with different parties. The digital files, the etching plate, a copper plate, was done in Oakland at Magnolia Editions in collaboration with Don Farnsworth. And what he did, he got the original file from the Rosenbach library, and he got rid of all the color, made it all black and white. And then I went back and did the hand color on top of it on a clear piece of paper. And then Don made a file of the hand coloring I did. And then he printed the copper plate, and then on top of the printed black and white print, he printed on a flat digital printer, he printed all the color. So it looks like watercolor. Unfortunately, you know, the edition was going to be done in Philadelphia, and in Philadelphia, they could not replicate the process that we did in Oakland. So in Philadelphia, the Rosenbach Gallery commissioned the printing to a local artist, to Cindy Ettinger from the Ettinger Studios, and she didn't have access to a flat printer, so she couldn't do the colors. So she ended up doing a chincole in collaboration with Reed DeCoit from the Fine Art Silicon Gallery Fine Art Prints in Philadelphia. And finally, it was done. But it was a lot of work for a single print, but I'm very happy it turned out very nicely. And by the way, Don did later just digital print, not copper plate enlarged. And he found a way in which the etching lines feel three-dimensional, as if you were touching an actual engraving, but it's a digital print altogether. So that was quite amazing. Anyways, right at Magnolia, we have done other prints like this one, the $1 billion bill. That was another kind of idea of a forgery without being a forgery. Working on money had inspired us to do quite a few projects. And this one is called the Federal Economic Privilege Note. We changed all the writing. This is the Unequal States of America. And then you could see the size, how many billionaires per capita are in the United States, 540. There might be a few more today. This was done a few years ago, and the percentage per capita. We put our signatures in the middle of the paper, and George Washington as a Wall Street magnate. So let me keep moving. So this is the back of the same bill. So earlier we did a digital dollar, like this one, that give us the actual number of the public debt. It's a computer that is connected to a satellite and has an instant update. I think, I mean, this was done in 2011, and it was updated about last year in $22 trillion. Today, I don't even want to see it, but it's probably at least $30 trillion. It's an unimaginable amount of work. And then on the upper right corner, you can see the share of the debt per person. This one, we call it Federal Bailout Note, the United States of America and one recession. Anyway, so I have done quite a few different works based on the economy, but I did other piece with another local publisher in San Francisco, Electric Works, with Noah Lang. And we did this one after the last economic downturn in 2008. And this was done in 2009, I believe. But I can't believe this became very much relevant today, 10 years later. Or 12 years later, sorry. Earlier we did another one, like this one, My Appropriation of Andy Warhol. This was done in the year 2000, about 20 years ago. And all of these cans have recipes for all these characters from the art world. And I'm sorry if I left anybody out, but I include artists, curators, historians, etc. And these are kind of like the recipes that you might be able to read in the back of the cans. Every recipe is different. Anyway, so I'm gonna move on to my codices too and my interaction with pre-Columbian imagery. I study a little bit of anthropology and the history of the conquest of Mexico. And I was struck by not only the genocide, but by the cultural culturicide that took place during the conquest. Here we see a picture done by an anonymous Aztec indigenous artist, in which the Spanish Franciscan priests and soldiers are executing eight indigenous leaders who refused to become Christianized. But you know, this was not only the terrible consequences of the conquest, but also the burning of books. Here you could see another, probably the same artist, another drawing by the same anonymous artist, with the Franciscan priests burning the codices. You could see that in the lower right, a little character with sort of like an accordion. Those are representing the books. And the Franciscan priests were thinking they were burning all these, you know, demons and pagan words of the time. Unfortunately, the biggest library in the continent, the Library of Texcoco, was burned with thousands of books. And the point is that there is not even a single Aztec book that survived the conquest. There are 3 Mayan books that made it, books like this one. This is the Codex Madrid. This is a really beautiful facsimile that I found in the Museum of El Prado. It's very close to the original print of the Codex Madrid. So it's one of the 3 Mayan books that survive in Europe, and there is potentially a 4th Mayan book in Mexico City, fragments of a book. The Codex Gautier, but there is the Codex Paris and the Codex Dresden. Those are the other Mayan books that survive. A single priest, Diego de Landa, was responsible for burning all of the Mayan books in Central America. So it's very tragic to see that only few books survive. Well, from this perspective, I realized that history is written by the victors of war. And from that perspective, history is an ideological construction more than a science. So as an artist, I felt entitled to do my own versions of my own books, basically trying to do look-alike codices. So this was the first codex I did. This is a print. This is a Xerox transfer book. It's called Tales of the Conquest. And this one is in the collection of the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. And every single image here, except for the first page, I hand painted that, but the rest it's Xerox transfer. It was done with a very dangerous chemical, with paint, lacquer thinner, I'm sorry. So it was I had to wear a mask to make the printing of all of these. And this is a technique that I keep using until today. I have done other books based on that mix of comic book characters as, you know, colonialist symbols and characters like from Posada and different mix imageries that create their own distinctive languages in books like this one. This was done by Moving Part Press. The text was designed by Felicia Rice, the person who runs that. And the text was borrowed from performances by Guillermo Gomez Peña, and I did all the collages. Sometimes I included some of my drawings, like the skeleton with Mickey Mouse hat, and so on. These are some of the close-ups. There's a constant collision between the West and the non-Western indigenous cultures going on through the pages of this book. And this book was an edition of 50, and I hand color about 6 copies of them. Other letterpress books I did this one more recently, a couple of years ago at Arion Press in San Francisco. And the master printer for this one was Blake. It was Blake Riley, who did an amazing job with the letterpress, especially because I did this design to print on very transparent Japanese paper on both sides. The book is Pedro Páramo by the title, you could see it, by Juan Rulfo. And it's about ghosts. It's a ghost town where you don't know who's alive and who's not. And to me, there's a big connection with pre-Columbian concept of life and death. In the pre-Columbian concept of life and death, life is a dream, and when you die, you wake up. So anyway, so this is the other side of the same page, and you can see the image of this lady becomes more like a ghost afterwards. This one is also the front. And these are not necessarily illustrations for the novel. It's more like a collaboration because the novel doesn't need illustrations. But anyways, this is the back of the other page with a volcano. Then this another father and son. These are based on some portraiture by Hermenegildo Bustos, a Mexican self-taught painter. So I did a little bit of tribute of that. He painted people from around the same period of time as the novel that was written by Juan Rulfo. And this is the other side with a pre-Columbian map with footprints and water. Anyway, so I've done other books. This one, I was invited by the publisher of my prints in Palo Alto, Paula Kirkeby, to do a collaboration or a work on school books in Israel for children, for elementary schools. So I decided to do a series of monoprints from lithographic transfers. This one is based on a censored book from colonial times in Mexico, The Portentos Life of Death. And I did a collage between that and the Codex Dresden. The Codex Dresden is one of the 3 Mayan codices that survived, that is in Germany. So here, for instance, on the left, you see the birth of death, which is with Adam and Eve, and so on. So the book was censored because, according to the Holy Inquisition, death cannot be alive, and it was not correct to say that. Plus, also there had been censorship in the New Spain. In colonial times, since the early 1500s, in 1531, all novels, books of fiction were forbidden because the viceroy in Mexico said that the new Christians, this is quote unquote, new Christians couldn't tell the difference between fiction and non-fiction. So anyway, I have an Aztec sculpture here in front of little Lulu speaking in Spanish. She's asking, will something important is happening now? And so on. I really love this book. Most of the edition was destroyed. I believe there is a copy of the Portentos Life of Death in the public library in New York City. So anyway, so I really love it. These engravings were, and the book was done by Fray Joaquin Bolaños. It's a pretty boring book in terms of the content, but the 17 engravings were done by this artist, Francisco Aguilera Bustamante, who is a predecessor of Francisco Goya. This was done in the late 1700s, in 1792, I believe. Anyway, so talking about the Mayan mythology, I made this sculpture. It was an edition of 10, I believe. And also this was in collaboration with Noah Lang at Electric Works. And this was about the end of the world in the Mayan mythology, which was supposed to happen in 2012. I think they missed the date for a few years. The weirdest thing to me is to see this work today and realize that I actually put a bat as the main character of the whole piece. This one is called Superbato Saves the World, and it's from, I believe, from 2011, a year before the supposed end of the world in the Mayan calendar. By the way, the end of the world in the Mayan calendar doesn't mean necessarily the end of the world, but the end of an era and the beginning of another era. So it's not totally a total destruction of the world. And the symbolism of the bats, the bat in the Mayan culture means the guardian of the underworld. And it could be a good or a bad god. So there's a thin line, but they respected the bat as a powerful god. And to me, today it gives me like an idea that we are getting a message from nature. to try to have a better balance between nature and ourselves, because so many viruses have come from animals, from not only the bat or monkeys, but also other viruses have come from the Amazons, like the Zika virus not long ago that apparently came out of the deforestation of the Amazon. So to me, this is more like at the end about gambling with our own future. But hopefully, if we listen to the messages sometimes sent by a bat, hopefully we still have a chance to survive. This is a close-up of the piece. I have used that art jargon in different books, including some books I did with Bud Shark. Anyway, so I'm gonna move on to this book, The Misadventures of the Romantic Cannibals, that gave me quite a bit of trouble. This was part of Bud Shark's celebration of the indelible ink that was open at the Denver Contemporary Museum of Denver, or the Museum of Contemporary in Denver. And there was no problem there. That was in 2009. A year later, the same book traveled to Loveland in Colorado. And at the time, in 2010, there was a year of elections and the Tea Party was very active. And they discovered my book in this exhibition of Bud at the Loveland Museum. And this particular page here is what gave almost a heart attack to a lot of very extremist religious people. And the thing, sorry, anyway, so I'm gonna have to move a little faster because we're running out of time. Anyway, so unfortunately, this page was picked by a group of people that boycotted the exhibition, but even though the exhibition had nothing political, people got really upset. Somebody moved all the way, or drove all the way from Montana to Colorado and destroyed the print. She drove her 18-wheeler, got into the gallery, broke the glass of the frame and destroyed the book. And I guess, I'm sorry, nobody told this person, this was a multiple original. It was, there were at least 39 other copies. The edition is 30 plus 10. And anyways, the whole thing ended up, thankfully, because there was another boycott by the same group at the Smithsonian Museum just about a few weeks later, and they forgot about us. The Smithsonian had the exhibition Hide and Seek, which was a lot of queer artists, and they were boycotting that. So when they forgot about us, I made friends with a pastor that defended my work. A pastor decided that he agreed with my topic on the book. The book was protesting the pedophilia in the Catholic Church. And he also risked his life. He got attacked online. He had to get a security person to protect him. His house was put online. It got really scary. I got a lot of hate mail. But when they forgot about us, we became very good friends. And Pastor Jonathan Wiggins asked me if I could do a painting of Jesus for his church. And I am not religious. I told him, I am not religious and nobody knows how Jesus looks like. So I sent him this picture and I thought, they're not gonna go for it, but they did. So he read or emailed to his congregation and they accepted. And then I had to do a painting of Jesus for his congregation, which I did. So I did this piece. They loved it. It was shipped. They paid for the shipment. Eventually, they invited me to go to the inauguration of this book. I didn't want to go. I was really afraid. I thought we're gonna get killed if I go because Colorado has like a itchy finger for guns. But no, I went, and it was one of the most beautiful experiences I had. Nobody tried to convert me into Christianity. Nobody talked to me about Jesus. The pastor just wanted to meet me. I thank the congregation for being open-minded, and they agreed with the pedophilia in the church should end. A few years later, I did a few more pieces after the pedophilia in the church, which I think hasn't been resolved yet. And this time, just to make clear that I was not talking about anything else but the institution of the church and not the beliefs of people, I was a little more clear. Anyway, so I'm gonna pretty much end up my conversation with just showing other stereotypes that I have played with, like myself in this case. I thought I was putting myself in the middle of a stereotype just to show that there is a human being behind the stereotypes. But besides that, I researched my DNA. This is another print I did. Those were prints I did with Bud Shark, by the way. I did this print at Magnolia Edition. It's a digital print on metal. But anyway, so a few months later, I did the first print with Bud. I checked my DNA, and I happened to be 51% Native American, 30% Southern Iberian, and the rest I am Jewish, as Ashkenazi. I am Arabic too. I am from Central Africa, from Southern Asia, from Eastern Asia. So my ancestors were very prolific, and were, I guess, happy to mix with everybody everywhere. So the first Chagoya was born 250,000 years ago. Anyway, so some of my little paintings where I blew up the stereotypes had become inspiration for some of my latest prints with Bud Shark. Like this one is called Aliens. And other prints like this one. This is how Theodore de Brie represented Brazilian women. End up in this print. It's called The President's Xenophobic Nightmare in a Foreign Language. In Russian, you could read, I want to wake up in this moment. And on top in Spanish, I translate, the women keep the tribe. And I put every single racial stereotype as the babies of the women. So I'm gonna finish my lecture with this last print I did based on Charles Weimer. Charles Weimer was a German immigrant, Karl Weimer, he changed his name later. The abduction of Daniel Boone's daughter by the Indians in 1853. That was the name he gave. Originally, I did a charcoal drawing first, just to show that the first undocumented immigrants were the Europeans, like the Spaniard conquistadors, the Pilgrims, and so on. And I ended up with my most recent collaboration with Bud Shark. And I guess I will finish my lecture here, and we'll stop sharing my talk because we are gonna move to other topics. But you're welcome to ask me any questions after this. Thank you for listening, and I'm sorry I went over time a little bit. All right.
Thank you so much, Enrique.
All right, thank you. Sorry for overspending.
Not at all. It was a phenomenal overview
of
your work and all the different mediums, and introduce some of the work that you've done with Bud. So when Bud's ready, he will be starting a PowerPoint with really exciting images of his studio and of Enrique working and collaborating with Bud in the studio. And here comes the PowerPoint.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here, and always great to hear Enrique talk about his work. And I've worked with Enrique for 22 years, and in that 22 years, we've done 26 different lithographic projects. This is the first print that we made together, and Enrique was a visiting artist at the CU art department, and I had become aware of his work, and through some other artists who knew him, found out that he was coming to Boulder for the visiting artist, and I asked if he would be interested in making print while he was in Colorado. And this is the print that he made. It's printed on Thai mulberry paper. It's a lithograph with woodcut and some engraving. This is a close-up. You can see in this image some of the wood grain, and in the fine line drawings that are in this image were done as an engraving on a lithoplate, which is rather unusual, but worked very well for this. This was printed on the back side. You can see the red on this image was printed on the back side, and Enrique had been doing a lot of work on mate paper and painting on both sides, and we decided to do this print with a semi-transparent paper to see the image. This is Enrique working in our studio for one of the codexes that we were doing. After making that print, I'd been aware of some of Enrique's codexes that are made on a mate paper, and wanted to try and duplicate some of that work. And Enrique said, "Oh, I don't think you can print on the mate paper," but I usually don't. I usually try to do things that other people don't think are going to be possible. So we imported the mate paper and found out that we could print on the mate paper. It's has to be calendared and run through the press about 6 times to flatten the paper out so that we can print it on lithographic plates. And this is a print called the Ghosts of Liberty, and this is a proof of the print on the amate. And after we printed all the other colors, we printed a light color over it to make it look a little more aged. This is how the print looks when it's assembled, and it can be folded up as a book, but also displayed in a shadow box frame. This is Enrique working in our studio on another project. It's nice to see him at work in the studio. He often came with a suitcase full of books and images and magazines, and selected images from that suitcase full of goodies and made the print. This is a mylar from the print I showed you, which has been painted with a Xerox toner mixture and painted on the mylar, which is then laid on an aluminum plate and exposed. This particular plate was white, which we printed down first, so we would have white on the paper. The amate paper is brown and varied. This is another mylar from the Ghost of Liberty, and this would be the yellow plate. This is another mylar. You can see the variations in the way the toner can be used on the plate, and also there's splatters and deliberate sort of aging of the paper. This is the red plate. In this, up in the left corner, you can see there's an ellipse, and the mylars are canceled after we've made the plates, and to show that we won't make any further prints of this image. This is another mylar with a lot of washes on it to give tonality and make the book look aged. This is the key plate, which is made by Xeroxes that were then collaged onto the mylar and transferred to a lithographic plate, which was printed in black. This is the image, a little larger and a little easier to see some of the imagery in parts. On the left panel in this, there's also Shinkale, where we wanted a purer layer of surface that wasn't always amate, and we did collage with Thai mulberry paper. This is the Codex books that we do with Enrique read what we would consider backwards. They read from right to left, which comes from the Mayan writings. This is Enrique working on a plate for one of the prints that we've done, and he's using some deletion fluid to remove some of the imagery off the plate where it wasn't wanted. This is a large lithograph. It's 40 inches wide, and this was done in 2007, and Enrique had a very bad bicycle accident at Stanford and had a concussion, and this image is him on a plinth, and the red and white squares are his concussion. There's this little cartoon-like piece that runs along the bottom. This piece is called The Illegal Alien's Guide to Critical Theory. And these speaker balloons came from a book that we found and have used a lot called Art Criticism 101, and are really rather unreadable. In this one, it says works to suggest that act finally distills into something dense and unknowable. And then this is Enrique on his bike, and Batman and Robin are coming to his rescue. Went through the hoop, and here's his bike and his crash, and carried away to the hospital. Here he is with riding away on his bicycle. This is Enrique and I in the studio signing the prints that have been completed. And this is Enrique's nice image to me. We wanted to talk about the Sharkive. The CU Art Museum has acquired our archive, which is now about 3,000 pieces. It includes the finished lithographs and other prints, mylars, studies, trial proofs, color separations where we can see the different plates and the different colors that were made. And that collection will be shown at the CU Art Museum. It was planned to have an exhibition in 2021, but due to the coronavirus, et cetera, that has been postponed until 2022. We're looking forward to having that a show selected from the Sharkive collection. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, both Enrique and Bud. It was really fascinating to hear about your process and your thoughts behind your work. So I wanted to ask both of you a few questions. We have some questions from the audience as well. But going back to your collaboration, you've been working together for 22 years now and made 26 prints, which is quite an amazing time to work together. And I'd like to hear more about what inspired you to approach Chagoya, Bud, to work with you in your studio.
Well, I become aware of Enrique's prints through another artist friend in San Francisco, Don Ed Hardy. And Don's the one who connected me with Enrique. And I like projects and artists that are a little bit unusual, that aren't sort of and are often challenging. I like challenges. And when Enrique told me, "Oh, you can't print on the amate paper," I immediately figured out how we could do that and want to do that. And I was attracted to the imagery. I was attracted to him as a person and the way he makes his work. And that's the reason that I invited him to come to work with me.
Also, I thought it would be impossible to print on amate because the amate is handmade. It has very thick and thin areas, and it's on a bark paper. And when you print on it, it expands like a half an inch on a large sheet. And I thought it would be impossible to print, but found a way to flatten the paper by just calendaring the paper like 6 times or so on through the press before you start even printing on it. It's a lot of work.
Yes, right. A real testament to the collaborative process and how a master printer can facilitate the vision of an artist. We have also a question for you, Bud, from the audience. Can you talk more about how the university became interested in your archive?
Well, actually, we were interested in CU having an archive.
Okay.
They became interested in it. We felt like, well, we started actually collecting the work and realizing that we wanted to have an archive of our work, and it seemed that we made a lot of sense to have it here in Colorado, where all the work was done.
Yes.
And the director of the museum got very excited when I told them that we had this archive and that we were interested in having the museum acquire it. And she got well behind it and supportive and started raising funds, etc. And they built a new art museum, so it was an excellent place for them to host all the materials. She left, and a new curator, Sandra Furman, arrived, and she has taken up the Sharkive, and most of the work has been transferred to the CU Art Museum. And we will continue to give prints and related materials to the CU Art Museum and the Sharkive for as long as I continue to make prints. So it's an ongoing collection.
Great. Enrique, I'd like to make one question to you. At Sharks Inc. and elsewhere, you've made this body of work that you call reverse anthropology. And this is the idea behind them being that they're artifacts from a parallel universe in which the Mesoamericans conquered the conquistadors, and the cultural tables are turned, and the indigenous culture is the dominant culture. And I wondered if you could talk more about your use, and this was a question in the audience as well, of these conflicting symbols from various cultures, from the two sides of culture, and how it's your intention that this is a somewhat overwhelming experience, and it's not necessarily meant to be a completely understood dialogue or narrative.
Yes, no, I'll be happy. You know, originally, I mean, other people have thought about reverse anthropology, especially the border arts workshop in Tijuana, the border between Tijuana and San Diego, back in the late 80s, early 90s. But in my case, I decided that the point would be not so much how the world will be if, let's say, Native Americans have conquered Europe, because at the end it would have been just a different scenario, but with equally terrible results. You know, instead of cathedrals in Europe, they might have pyramids and so on. Not necessarily a better outcome, but I decided that more to challenge the perspective of the victors of war by presenting the perspective of those who, quote unquote, lost the wars, because that perspective is lost in history. And I decided to use the language of the pre-Columbian books, which is more a pictorial language that is more meant for performing. In other words, it reminds you of religious elements, calendaric elements, mythological stories without words. It's language without words. So I began to use that kind of a non-linear narrative that could be interpreted in different ways, but from the indigenous perspective of the language the indigenous cultures use in their books. Like, for instance, the book I did on the portentosa life of death. I said the whole title was the one I showed with Xerox lithographic transfers. By the way, I forgot to mention that was published by Catherine, the master printer was Catherine Kane. So we used that language, and that image was used also in another book I did with Bud Shark, The Escape from Fantasylandia, but it was more simplified in the monoprints. So that kind of non-phonetic language is what that dictates most of my books. And sometimes people get a little confused because they don't know what to read. But that's just because some of the symbology is lost in history. A lot of the symbology is pre-Columbian, and anthropologists are working really hard to decipher, especially the Mayan writing, which is thankfully one of the ones that survived the most. But still, I tried to do a contemporary twist. Originally, I was focusing on the US-Mexican clash of cultures, but after I lived for a period in Europe, a couple of times in France, I decided that the problem is more global. Everything's globalized. And I still use the pre-Columbian idea of visual languages with pictograms talking to each other, creating a multiple narrative, even though I open the context to more of contemporary time. So I hope I answered the question. And hopefully with some sense of humor too.
Yes, there's a question about humor. You're anticipating where I'm going next. You do, I know you prioritize humor in your work, and it's always important to you. I think I remember you talked about how with Goya's, your pieces that are recreations of Goya's, you think a long time about how you want to take that original Goya image and how can you do something funny, with contemporary work. So can you speak more from the audience? It says, can you talk about incorporating humor with such heavy material?
Yes, for me, humor is a defense against very painful situations. And in Mexico, I grew up with that sense of humor. In general, the culture in Mexico finds a way to laugh about very deadly scenarios. And maybe it's perhaps, I mentioned a little bit the idea behind the concept of life and death in pre-Columbian times. And it's not that Mexicans laugh at death. It's not about Day of the Dead. It's more about somehow humor that interacts with death that somehow overcomes the painful circumstances. André Breton, when he visited Mexico in 1940s, he decided that Mexico was a surrealist country. And he decided that Frida Kahlo was a surrealist artist, although Frida Kahlo didn't see herself as a surrealist. She saw herself as a realist artist. So, but that gives you an idea of the contrast of the Mexican vision of life and death. And this kind of a surrealist imagery, which André Breton, in a way, defined the surrealist humor as the triumph of pleasure over the most difficult over pain, over the most difficult circumstances for pleasure. And before he said that, that's what I was doing. I don't do it because André Breton wrote it. For me, it's the triumph of pleasure over pain under the worst circumstances for pleasure. And I hope that answers the question. And that opens the door to very complex issues. And I hope that way I'm not preaching anything. I'm trying not to convince anybody of what I think. And if anything, I'm expressing my own anxieties, but with a sense of humor, like what people in Mexico will do after an earthquake or after a major disaster. You could see all kinds of jokes that somehow I don't experience when I have an earthquake, experience of an earthquake in the Bay Area. There was no jokes, the big earthquake in the 80s. While in Mexico a few years before, which, lost thousands of people, died, people were telling one joke after another. So it's just a cultural difference, but I grew up in that culture. My own family is very nasty at, bullying each other in the middle of lunch or a comida. And if you get mad, you lose. You have to come back with a funnier joke. And that goes from the little kids to the grandparents.
All right, we're going to do one more question from the audience, and then we will move into a discussion about how we are all functioning in our current reality. So the question is about your teaching, which is an important part of what you do. Enrique, you are a professor at Stanford University for art practice. Is that the actual title?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And you've been teaching there for 20 years. Yeah, 25 years. Mm-hmm. So the question is, how do you impart a sense of responsibility and social integrity to your students in their own practice?
Well, I try to inspire whatever the students had in mind. I don't try to talk about my own artwork with them unless they are curious and they want to know. But for the most part, like I teach drawing, printmaking, painting, and two graduate seminars, one on a critique of their work and another graduate seminar on art and economics. But with my undergrad students, I first teach them techniques, but then I ask them to do something significant for them. Not for me, but for them. What will be significant in their lives? And I've been surprised with some amazing students of mine that come out with very powerful, sometimes very poetic imagery, is very self-affirming imagination. And for me, it's just a dialogue. I don't feel like I'm teaching art per se. I'm just encouraging art, but I don't think art cannot be art per se. I don't think anybody could really teach art, but you might inspire people to make art because there is no recipes for creativity. I wish there were recipes for creativity. Well, I'll just follow them or anybody follow them, but it's part of the human complex mind when you invent and create something that didn't exist before. But my students, for the most part, I hope they find inspiration with our group critiques and with an ongoing dynamic in the group. And my best reward is when they're happy with the class and they discover something in themselves that they didn't know they had. That's, to me, the goal of teaching. And I learn from them because, as they say, whoever teaches learns twice. So I learn from my students a lot.
Yes. And Bud, you've been a teacher in the past as well. And you have a lot of personal assistants who've moved on to very important roles at various organizations, print shops.
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit about your role in shepherding a new generation into your profession?
Well, yeah, I've worked a lot with a lot of artists in long times, like with Enrique, but I also like connecting with new younger artists that I haven't worked with before. And those are exciting and interesting projects for me. And it mixes it makes the mix a little more interesting. But I have a lot of artists that I've worked with regularly, like Enrique, who come. Well, Enrique comes every year. Some artists come every other year, and those relationships are extremely important to me. And we develop a body of work that's really interesting to see how the artist's work changes, and artists who are in the studio and see what another artist did and say, "Oh, I want to do something like that," or "I want to use that process," or something. It makes it all very interesting and sometimes very challenging, but I like that part of it also.
Great, thank you. Well, Judy, could you come back and join us to talk about the future and our current reality?
Okay. I think I'm back. We wanted to take a couple of minutes for those of you who can stick around, just to talk about how we're all adapting professionally during the pandemic. I know that Bud was supposed to participate in the IFPDA print fair at the end of October at the Javits Center. The Javits Center was turned into a hospital. That was canceled, which is a major hit to the print world. However, IFPDA mobilized, and this week is opening up an online print fair this week that will last a month, and it's live through Artsy. And Bud has a full viewing room along with all of the members, and including members who couldn't physically exhibit in the fair in past years. So that's a kind of positive. Enrique, we can talk about the very moving writing that you did for the Shelter in Place Chronicles for SquareCylinder.com. I know Manhattan Graphic Center is greatly accelerating their online programs. And at IPCNY, we're doing the same thing in many realms. And I wanted to just take 2 minutes to show you through Jen Bradovich, IPCNY's exhibition and curatorial manager. If she can join us, she'll show you the website that she created from scratch as our spring show, including Enrique's work was canceled due to the closing of the gallery. Jen.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Judy. When COVID forced us to close our gallery, it was right before the works for our show Reprint 5 projects were meant to arrive in the space. So we had to quickly figure out a way to bring the show to you digitally online. And what we really wanted to do was create something that wasn't super static, but would be dynamic and give people an opportunity to see works up close and to spend time navigating intuitively and experiencing more information along the way as they wanted. So I'm just going to very quickly show you what the website looks like and demo its features using Enrique's page, which features one of the codices that he's printed with Bud. So this is Return of the Macrobiotic Cannibal from 1998. And like the other codices we've looked at tonight, it's also on Amate, and it's read from the right over here to the left. I'm going to show you details further down. And on each page for the site, which is organized by artists, you'll see these texts about the work, and then you'll also see these opportunities to hear these really nice audio clips from Jennifer Farrell, who's Associate Curator in Drawings and Prints at the Met. In case you want more information, they really add another level of engagement. So this codex introduces Enrique's character of the utopian cannibal, who you kind of see here on the right, wearing a head from the famous Mesoamerican Borgia Codex. And he sort of romps through this landscape that Sarah described as sort of belonging to this clash of signifiers ranging from a myriad of sources. On our website, we only offer a small selection of the multiple different sources that Enrique is working from. But when you get to the bottom of the pages, you'll see an opportunity to go deeply into those as well. Any of the little read more buttons here will pull up more information if you're interested in learning more information about those source materials. You might see things you recognize, such as Superman, who here is being punched by Spider-Man, but in Enrique's book is knocked out by an Aztec skull. You may also notice imagery from this book, Jim Star of the Border Patrol, which is a 1937 children's book about a sort of gunslinging Border Patrol officer at the Mexican border. And you may see images from European sources of the 17th century, images of the so-called New World that Europeans were kind of dreaming up. And so here you see Spanish ships arriving on the so-called Cannibal Island. And these are all sources that Enrique uses critically in this reverse modernism approach. So at the bottom of each page, you see an option to get in touch with us. We really want you to be able to have a dialogue like you would in the gallery with us. And so you have an opportunity to join the conversation, share questions, share your experiences of the site, share the connections that you make. They come directly to me. We'll share the insights, the questions we're getting. We'll keep the dialogue going in a two-directional way with you. So please do reach out and do get in touch with us as we're experiencing this show from a distance.
That's great. Wonderful. Thank you. Maybe, Bud, you could just tell us a little bit about what you know about online. Oops. Am I muted? No. Of the online IFPDA print fair, which is the first time they've done any such thing. I'd love to hear that. And then I'd love to hear, Enrique, from you about the Shelter in Place Chronicles and the very moving language and images that you show. So
I was invited by David Roth, who is the editor of Square Cylinder, to answer a few questions about artists. He did three publications already about artists living under COVID-19. And what I wrote, I didn't think I was going to say so much, but I ended up writing more than what he asked me. I feel that these times, it's kind of like the first time I feel that outside or door, there is death waiting for us, but in the middle of the most beautiful, most nice, clean air that we have, at least here in the Bay Area, we have a beautiful landscape, and the birds are everywhere. The flowers are flowering in the middle of the spring. We have hummingbirds that go back and forth in our house. We take walks to a nearby mountain, and yet we feel this existential threat. And like most people, we never lived through a pandemic. We didn't know what a pandemic was until it's really happening. And for me, this is kind of like a message we're getting from nature. It's a message maybe sent by a bat to tell us, with maybe it's as I say, it's a tough love kind of a message from nature to tell us that we better be in tune with nature. We cannot be separated from nature. We have to find ways in which we deal with the animal world, with the ecology, with the climate in a more sustainable way. Otherwise, we're gonna extinct ourselves. Nature is wise enough to design something that is attacking us only, as who we are. We are social beings, and we cannot be social beings right now except by digital ways. So it's attacking exactly who we are. It's been attacking other animals, but other animals seem to survive, like cats and dogs. They are fine with it. but people, I mean, it's just a message for me. So my point, and if you read the article in the Square Cylinder, because it's also the artists, my wife, Cara Maria, talks about it. Luis de Soto, a Native American artist, also talks about it. Lulu Stanley, who was one of my teachers. All these artists have different concerns about COVID-19, but all of us kind of share an existential view of what to do with this world. It goes beyond any art we could make. The economy, on the other hand, is very unbalanced. We see Wall Street going up since the government began to buy corporate bonds. Wall Street seems so happy with the bailout. In the meantime, we see the longest lines in the food banks that we remember ever seeing since maybe the Big Depression. So this virus is bringing out or social inequities. Like more people of color, like brown and black people, seem to be more affected by this virus. But in very general terms, we really need to reset our interaction within ourselves, as well as ourselves with nature, the world, as we know. Otherwise, I don't know if this message is not being taken into account. I don't know what else can do that. Otherwise, we're going to get more pandemics. We're going to get more climate extremes, and we will have maybe not even a choice to react to it or to respond to it. That's, I think, a concern that many of my fellow artists have, and maybe many of you have in the audience and yourself.
But I saw reproductions of 2020 paintings that looked very current in their references to politics. Are any of those, were any of those made recently while you've been at home? Tell us about working at home versus working in the studio.
Yeah, well, I don't have access to my studio because it's at the university. So I've been working on the dining room on a hand-painted codex. So I'm working on a small scale, but so I have to rethink about everything. I was going to have an exhibition at my local gallery, Anglin Gilbert Gallery, and now it's postponed permanently. And many galleries might not even reopen. This economic situation is also very tough on artists in general. So I've been dealing on a small scale format, and yes, I'm painting mostly things about what is happening today. The paintings you saw in Square Cylinder are from this year, and they're still in progress. I haven't finished them. I didn't have time to show paintings because also this is about printmaking, not about paintings. I didn't show any paintings that didn't relate to my prints, but yeah, I've been dealing with this issue, and I guess people should check the Square Cylinder for more imagery. So it's artists responding to COVID-19, and I am on the second part.
And so, thank you, Enrique. Bud, can you tell us how the IFPDA online artsy art fair came about, and how you've participated and what you have on display?
Well, I'm quite impressed with how the IFPDA has dealt with COVID, and I think their online exhibition is very good. I think everybody's trying their best, and I think we're seeing some response to that online, yeah, but it's understandable that they won't be able to do the fair this fall, and so when we're all trying to figure out new ways of getting our work out there and connecting with people who are interested in the work, and I think we all have to try new things.
And Bud, what do you have access to your workshop? Can you continue some level of work in there without your full staff?
Well, we actually started work at the beginning of this week, and I have my 2 assistants, and we're actually in production again.
Great.
The studio is where we live, so it's easy for me. And I was in and out of the studio for 6 or 8 weeks trying to do things, but we're now able to print again. And I have another project coming up later this month, an artist from New Mexico. So we're getting back in the swing of things. Yeah.
Wonderful. There are many more questions, but we're nearing an hour-and-a-half point. We could go on for a long time, but there are a lot of comments that we'll share with both Enrique and Bud, and there are questions that we'll answer online before we completely end this broadcast session. Unfortunately, Sarah's computer crashed, and she's been trying to reboot, and she was going to do the thank you and the sign off, so I'm going to do it on her behalf and thank the teams at Manhattan Graphic Center and IPCNY for pulling this together very quickly. This is both of our firsts in terms of live webinars, but not our last. So we're going to zap you a 2-minute survey, and we would really like to hear your comments on duration, on time of day, on what you want to hear, so we can design programming that you want to see. And I want to thank particularly Enrique for giving us his time, for giving us his creativity, and to Bud for being there, and for Barbara helping out behind the scenes and sharing your stories in a way that we might not have been able to in person in New York with both of you in other time zones. And I think with that, we'll leave it. And
thank you. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you all so much.
And
don't forget to visit Manhattan Graphics Center.org and IPCNY.org for future programming.
And thank you, Sarah. I hope she's listening.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye, Bud.
Bye, Enrique. So long.
Bye, see you later.